And good day, good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world. Welcome to Splendid Isolation number 31. I believe we've been doing this for 31 weeks now. I'm going to do as I usually do and start us off with a spot of music. Well, I hope I'm going to. What the hell's going on here? Technical difficulties. Boom, boom. Okay, get that. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that, folks. Oop.
Great start to stream. Yeah, Duke, I think we can't see the screen. You're muted as well,
Yeah,
mate.
lol.
I think Duke's had another power cut.
It's for those of you who want to watch at home, it's the British Light Infantry. You can just watch that in your own time. You can sync it up.
Yeah. Take it in.
Or we could just sing it for you instead.
I don't know the lyrics. Okay, okay, as I think Duke can't hear us. Okay, Napoleon.
Could you not hear it?
Oh no, we couldn't hear it. No, it's not playing as well.
Oh, okay. Beg your pardon. I'm sorry. We'll go back and do it. I thought you could hear it, but never mind. Let's try again. Apologies. I'm doing boom attack.
Round 2, lads.
Right, now this should be fine. Cool. There you go.
For battle prepared in their country's just cause, their king to avenge and support all his laws. As fierce as the tiger, as swift as the roe, the British light infantry rush on their foe. No rebels unnumbered oppose their career. Their hearts are undaunted, they're strangers to fear. No obstacles hinder, relentless they go, and death and destruction attend every blow. The alarm of the drum and the cannon's loud roar, the musket's quick flash but inflames them the more. No dangers dismay, for they fear no control, but glory and conquest inspires every soul. Whenever the foe stands raised in their sight, with ardor impatient they pant for the fight. Rout havoc, confusion they spread through the field, and rebellion and treason are forced to yield.
And that was the British Light Infantry, which apparently was an American loyalist song from the American War of Independence, I am told. Written in New York. Yeah, apparently. Written in New York, is what it is claimed, in the 1770s. So there we go. And it's, it's often forgotten in the American War of Independence. There was actually a very substantial number of Americans who did support the King and the British. So there we go. And we've actually got at least one loyalist American on our Discord. So, and a lot of them at the end of the war actually shifted up to Canada. What have we got? Hi, that's Evolved Saxon. Oh, said he would tune in. Yeah, good. And Werner Kronst in the chat here was actually on that stream I did earlier with Jonathan Pohl. So, welcome, Herr Cronist. Okay, guys, I'm going to do what I usually do on these streams, and I'm going to go around and ask people if there's anything they would like to bring up as a first topic. And I'm going to start with Limbu.
Hello. So I think firstly, before I get on a religious topic of mine, firstly, you should definitely watch. I think our Gurkha stream me and Duke did. It was excellent stream. And
I enjoyed it. I learned something. I learned a few things on that stream.
Yes.
So yes, absolutely, I agree with that. Go and
one
check
thing
out
which really annoys me is that I believe we had 18 likes on that stream until I don't know 24 hours there. It's 4 likes and 2 dislikes. It's a piss take.
Yeah, but wait a minute. I actually pinned that they did that. There was 18 likes at the end of the stream, and then when I looked at it the next day, it had gone to 4 likes and 2 dislikes. And so I pinned the message that originally there were 18 likes on it, and then last time I looked, it's actually now got 19 or 20 likes and no dislikes. So what YouTube is playing, I've got no idea. But I've heard many bigger channels than mine going on about that stuff.
The Gurkha stream was a history stream, yeah.
Yeah, it was principally a history stream. I mean, we spoke a little bit about the modern Royal Gurkha rifles, but for the most part, it was a history stream. And also, for an opportunity for people, including myself, to learn more about the Gurkhas from someone who's an expert on them. So it's a good stream. I'd definitely go and have a look at it. But anyway, Limbo, I think you had a subject that you wanted to.
So yesterday, I think it was well expected from many traditional Catholics that the motu proprio by our pontiff, my pontiff, the traditional custodes, the restrictions of the traditional Latin Mass was in place, and it reverted most of Pope Benedict's works to help fellow radicals and sedevacantists. And if you don't know who sedevacantists are, they're in essence they're just Catholics, but they don't believe in holy pontiff rule of the church. And what this has done is they've restricted the rights of certain Catholic society groups, which they have certain problems with the church. Well, the Vatican II Council, euchemical reforms, and what I'm saying right now is this will not help the church in any way, shape, or forward.
So can I just get you to clarify something? What the Pope's done, is that going to make holding traditional mass in Latin, is that going to make it easier or harder?
Harder. It's going to make it harder.
Okay, so that to me as a traditionalist, although I'm not a Roman Catholic, but as a traditionalist, that to me sounds a bad thing.
Yes, that is a very bad thing. And there's this funny tweet by I think it was one counselor or so, a person who deeply believes in the Second Vatican Council or any council of the Vatican, and it said, did Pope Francis just radicalize half the church? Because it was an outrage. Most liberal Catholics and most moderate Catholics seem to have disliked this as well as traditional Catholics, which I found. Oh, continue.
I was just going to say, look, I'm not a Roman Catholic. I mean, I'm an agnostic. I got married in a High Church of England church, and my son was baptized in a High Church of England church, but and my father was Church of England. But I'm not a Catholic. But you will know, Limbu, there is quite a lot of Catholics in sort of our neck of the woods politically. It's quite common, and I follow quite a lot of guys who are Catholic, and I don't hear any of them saying anything good about the current Pope.
I'm as a good follower of the Catholic Church. Some of them, some traditionalists, especially rad-trads, you could say, they paint Pope Francis in a bad light. However, this motu proprio I can't stand for. And I'm not going to be angry because Pope Francis called traditionalists rigid in his motu proprio and his letter to the bishops. And I'm not angered at the Pope. However, I'm just deeply saddened by this change. And all I can do is pray that the next Holy Pontiff would do something to ease and calm down tensions within this whole idea of Novus Ordo, so vencular Mass against traditional Latin Mass.
Yeah, well, as I say, I'm looking at this as an outsider, but I would certainly say that all the Catholics I follow and respect don't have a very high opinion of this particular Pope. So,
yeah.
There we go on that one. I see that King Baby Bob in the chat is suggesting that Pope Francis participated in the Argentine military.
Oh no, I mean,
he's also saying that he supported the Argentine invasion of the Falkland Islands, which I would obviously totally be against.
Well, I think that's some shit personally. That's some rad trad espousal of Pope Francis, and I'm denying.
I got no idea, mate. I've got no idea. I don't know anything about the history of this Pope. All I know is that most of the Catholics I respect don't like him much. So there we go, because they think he's a liberal and a modernizer and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, all right. So is that the main thing you wanted to talk about to start with?
Yeah, that's probably the main thing. I'll probably make a whole YouTube video dedicated to this whole issue.
Yeah, I was going to. Well, one of the things I'm going to start doing, Limbu, as I should have done before, is at the end of these streams, I'm going to let people show their channel anyway, so you can do that later. Baron Badger and the rest of the chat, good evening. I'm going to move on to Napoleon. Napoleon, you got anything you would like to bring up as an opening subject?
Not really. I mean, Limbu was saying about how he's going to make a video about it. I think I should say that I put a video out. It's my first one about Irish people, and I think Irish racism would be one of the subjects.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, look, my mother was half Irish and half Welsh, and my father was mostly English with a little bit of Scottish. And I know for a fact there are a lot of damn good Irishmen around. Yeah, obviously there are bad Irishmen. There are certainly plenty of Irishmen who don't like Britain. But there are good Irishmen too. And obviously Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom. So that's my feelings on that stuff.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear what you said the last 5 seconds.
I said that obviously Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I'd agree by conquest, although there's...
Well, by the people who live there as well.
Oh yeah, Ulster is...
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah,
Scotland and Ireland, but there's... I think we'd have to have a more complex discussion rather than like a 5-minute preview. Yeah,
listen, Tommy Hill in the chat, I agree. Probably the majority of Irishmen would like Britain to leave Northern Ireland, but it ain't down to the majority of Irishmen. It's down to what the people of Northern Ireland want, and the majority of people in Northern Ireland are Protestants, and the majority of them want to remain an integral part of the United Kingdom. And that's the end of the matter as far as I'm concerned. I mean, and I served 2 tours in Northern Ireland with the British Army, so there you go. Many moons ago, when it was still quite, the Troubles were still going on. So there we go. That's my opinion on that one. And as I said, there are a lot of good Irishmen. And you will find even to this day, quite a lot of the Irish Guards, for example, hail from the Republic. But many of them have a tradition of joining the Irish Guards. So, and people also forget that in World War II, when Southern Ireland was neutral, about a third of the Irish armed forces deserted, went north and joined the British forces. And I think that's often forgotten as well. So there's 2 sides to these stories,
Well, yeah, Southern Ireland was also working with the Nazis to try and get them to invade. So I wouldn't.
Well, hang on. Let's change that. The Southern Irish government was fairly pro-Nazi. Yes, I agree. But what I said was that about a third of the Irish armed forces, the actual blokes in the Irish military, deserted, went north and joined the British Army, and that's just a fact. They did.
I'm not surprised.
Big up Ulster.
I don't know why they deserted, but I doubt they did it because they were very pro-British.
Well, then I don't know why they did it, because maybe they just like to fight. I mean, yes, that's possible, but I think it's something that gets forgotten quite often. But especially by people who are very anti-Irish, and I know some people are very anti-Irish, some British people. I'm not particularly, and it's by no means because of my mother, who was not the best mother in the world, let me tell you. It's by no means because of that. It's just because I've met quite a lot of decent Irishmen in my time. I mean, I've met bad Irishmen, but then I've met a load of shitbag Englishmen too. So it's one and half a dozen of the other. No nation has a monopoly on good or bad people.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. Like, I'm not talking about like if like there are bad and good Irishmen. Like, you can don't really know how to word it, but my observations aren't observations probably the wrong word, but my beliefs and my findings aren't down to individual experience. Like you're saying, like, I've met good Irishmen but bad Irishmen as well. I'm not saying that that's where my beliefs come from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, fair enough. I mean, look,
Yeah.
I've said before on this stream that I think one of the things that pushes the SNP in Scotland is actually quite a lot of Irish immigrants. Yeah, I think the SNP has got a lot of Irish immigrant support. The sort of people who in the 1990s would have supported Celtic rather than Rangers in Glasgow. And where you could drive around Glasgow and see pro-IRA graffiti in some places.
Yeah.
And those guys are actually more Irish than Scottish. And I certainly think that has a bad effect on the SNP, for sure. But I'm never gonna accept that like all Irishmen are bad, because all Irishmen are not bad.
No, I'm not saying that all Irishmen are bad. Just saying
Cool.
that there's certain
Cool,
things.
and then we can agree on that one. I mean, I know, like Sojo, for example, is pretty anti-Irish.
Lord.
What? Mind you, Sojo's pretty anti-everybody when the mood suits him. But so
The Irish question.
in Britain and America, go on, John McNamara, expound on that, and we'll
Yes,
answer
what
you.
is the Irish question?
What is the Irish question as far as you're concerned?
No, I think
John
I know
McNamara?
what the Irish question is. I think there was this meme about how about 70% of Irishmen in in America they own about 70% of the banks. Yeah, I think
Really?
that's the Irish question. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Did you watch my video?
No, I haven't watched your video yet, Napoleon. No,
Ah,
no, but I've just seen off a meme, so I might
Yeah,
watch
and-
it later.
yes.
Patriotic Archive has just joined us in the chat, and he's got an excellent channel of military and patriotic music, which I always plug. Our first tune this evening actually didn't come from Patriotic Archive, but our last one will. And our last tune this evening is actually about an Ulster regiment. So there we go. But Patriotic Archive's got a good channel, which I tell people to go and subscribe to. And I was saying just earlier, like my mother was half Irish and half Welsh, so you know, and half Irish from the Republic. She came from Tipperary of all places, so you know.
Anglo-Irish and proud.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people like that, mate. There are a lot of people like that. I was born in London, like very close to the River Thames. Only probably not even 10 minutes walk from Tower Bridge. I lived when I was a small child, and there were loads and loads of Anglo-Irishmen in that area. Like there was a huge Catholic church, like just across the road from where I lived. And that was because of the number of Irish immigrants who settled in that part of the world. And there were bad ones and there were good ones. And when I served in the British Army, I served in a regiment which was basically a London regiment for the most part. And there were quite a few Anglo-Irish people in that regiment, including me. So, you know.
Right. I mean, yeah, I know like, a lot of Irish people immigrated to England during the past year. Something like 25% of all English people have either a substantial or a major amount of Irish.
I'd be surprised if it was as high as that, but I'm sure it's like
it is very
10
high.
or 15%. I could absolutely believe, yeah, for sure.
Well, the figure I saw was like 25%, which is I'm not surprised by that at all.
Yeah, I mean it's possible. It's certainly possible. But
can I just acknowledge the Anglo-Irish thing because I think it's quite interesting to go
Yep.
into. It's like famous.
Go for it.
Like historically, the term Anglo-Irish, I think, was implied incorrectly because, like, speaking, say, in one context, which would be like in terms of the military, people like you have the three field marshals, Wilson, Wolseley, and Wellington. They're like three, and Kitchener. Like those are four pretty big British generals. And
yeah, but they're not really Irish. They're Anglo-Irish.
No, they are by no means Irish.
Yeah,
everybody calls
they
Wellington.
were from Anglo families who lived in Ireland.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, actually, one of the things you could say is that the closest that the British had to a Junker class, you know, the Prussian Junker class, who ran most of the German military, the closest Britain had to that was really the Anglo-Irish gentry and the guys from Ulster. So many British Army officers, particularly, came from that sort of background.
Yeah, the British Army was filled to the brim with Irishmen. It was ridiculous.
Oh, the privates in the British Army, Irish privates, were very, very common, and not just in Irish regiments. I mean, there were very, very fine Irish regiments in the British Army, like, for example, the Connaught Rangers. Great regiment. Rudyard Kipling's Devil's Own. They had a fabulous reputation as a fighting regiment in war, and they had a less fabulous reputation as a fighting regiment in peace. But that's a different story. But even English and Scottish regiments had quite a lot of Irish recruits in the 19th century.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Irish overrepresentation in regiment goes back since, I think, to the Revolutionary Wars. The amount of Irishmen that were in Scottish and English regiments were, it was ridiculous. It was like almost, I think at one point, the Black Watch, I think it was like a fifth of it was just full of Ulster, and I.
Really, I'm surprised the Highland regiments.
I have,
so
yeah,
many.
I have.
I knew the Lowland regiments did, but I didn't know the Highlanders did.
Yeah, I think the Irish are very much overrepresented in the.
But I mean, it's the same if you look in America, the American Army, in the American Civil War. But also, if you even look at the 7th Cavalry with Custer that got killed at Little Bighorn, loads of Irishmen. But the reason for that, of course, was that our Irishmen were poor immigrants and they were looking for a job, so they joined the military. It's as simple as that, really.
Yes.
But I mean, I do think also there's yes, absolutely patriotic archive. On the whole, Irishmen make excellent soldiers. Yes, they do. But also on top of that, I would just say this: look, I don't think you can compare Irishmen moving to England or Scotland to what's happening these days with mass furboard immigration into the UK. It's not the same at all. It's far easier.
I mean,
it's far
debatable.
easier it's far easier for a white Northern European to integrate into a society than it is for people who come from totally different cultures and backgrounds.
Maybe, right? Maybe I like in the case of Scotland, an Irishman, right? Okay, well, at least in my experience, an Irishman when you see one. Okay, there are certain places in Glasgow City that you.
Yep. Yeah, I've been to Glasgow quite a few times, mate. I used to live in Stirling, in between Glasgow and Edinburgh. And I actually like Glasgow. I think it's a nice city, or it used to be when I knew it, which was like in the late 1980s. Yeah, there were bits of Glasgow which were absolutely Irish. Like I said, you used to find provisional IRA propaganda slogans written on railway bridges and shit like that.
The Irish regiments advanced first during the Somme. Wow, that is so cool.
Well, I don't know if they did, to be honest with you. I think that the Irish regiment certainly fought very well on the Somme.
That is so cool.
Hang on, I think it's also true that one stage on the Somme there was a Southern Irish division right next to a Ulster division, and they ended up fighting together.
Fuck it, one struggle.
One struggle.
But I'm not going to turn this in. I'm not going to turn this into an Irish stream, and I'm most certainly not going to turn it. And I'm most certainly not going to turn it into an anti-Irish stream. If I get too much of that on my Discord, I will chuck people out to do that on my Discord. To be honest.
Fair enough.
I really will.
Really,
I don't like it, mate. I'm happy for you. I'm happy to talk in generalizations about people. And yeah, like I said, I think the Irish people in Scotland have a bad effect in terms of the SNP, and that I totally agree with. But I'm not. If you start taking it down to the individual level, then I'm not going to accept that. Because there are good and patriotic Anglo-Irish people.
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
I would never bring it down to the individual level.
Oh no, could I point something out? Because I said this in one of my older videos. The idea that most Irishmen are Catholic and the IRA are Catholic, it's absolute bollocks once again. I mean, my main point on that video was that the IRA and its agenda was before they discouraged the idea of Catholicism, because they believed Catholicism would distract and object the main idea of irredentism. So
look. I did 2 tours in Northern Ireland of the British Army, and I can tell you for a fact that when the Provisional IRA were not simply thug gangsters, which a lot of the time is all they were. They were running protection rackets and all that kind of stuff. When they weren't that, the leadership was mostly Marxists. And I have yet to meet Marxists who are very Catholic, to be honest with you.
Yes, that was one of my points I did say in my video. Yeah.
You know, most Marxists are not Roman Catholic. I've got to say this, and I served with lots of soldiers who were British soldiers who were Catholics, including British officers who were Catholics. So again, I'm not going to. I'm even less going to go for this anti-Catholicism than I am for anti-Irish stuff, to be honest. Because as I say, I'm an agnostic. If I had a religion, and if I ever did go back to religion, which I doubt, but if I did, I'd be a High Church of England guy. But I've got nothing whatever against Catholics.
Do you mind if I
but
just,
Nazis are Catholic. Oh, what the fuck is this bollocks?
do you mind if I,
Natman Prime in the chat. You're talking shit, mate. I'm sorry. I mean, the nearest you could come for that stuff would be the Nazi heartland in the 1930s was Bavaria, and yeah, Bavaria was Catholic, but I don't think that had anything to do with it.
Oh no, I covered it in my recent video as well. The whole Hitler's Pope shit and the Catholic Nazi bollocks.
Yeah, and I've actually read quite a lot of stuff about, you know, how the Pope was supposedly pro-Nazi. No, he bloody well wasn't. It was absolute nonsense. He wasn't even particularly pro-Italian fascist. But in any case, the Italian fascists were a very different beast from the German Workers' National Socialist Party. They weren't the same at all. But we are getting way off our normal topic, which is about British nationalism. So
okay, let's talk about British nationalism. Come on.
Yeah, let's do that, guys. I'd much prefer to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
I think we should start this subject off by discussing a. Oh fuck! What was it? Oh, it was oh my god! It was something in Scotland. I saw a news article about it. Hang on, let me try and find it again. What was it? I had it on my screen, but I think I accidentally closed it off.
That's okay.
While Napoleon finds that out, Duke, what are your thoughts on the Northern Ireland Protocol?
I think it's a betrayal of the people of Ulster.
Yeah, I feel that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a total betrayal of the people of Ulster. The British cannot and should not accept a border between Britain and the rest, between Northern Ireland and the rest of Britain. Absolutely not. We should tell the EU to get fucked and just ignore them.
Hey. Cheek salad.
Natman Prime. Hitler said he was a Catholic. Well, given he was an Austrian, he might well have been when he was born. Whether he was much of a Catholic when he was an adult, I'm by no means sure.
I mean, all I'm going to say is just watch my video. It's not like I want views or something, but just watch it. We're getting
I just think the whole thing is a red herring. It doesn't matter really what Hitler was or wasn't. I mean, that doesn't paint the whole of the rest of the religion with any sort of brush at all.
No,
and I am absolutely certain, and I know this for a fact, and I'm an old bastard, I'm 56, I've met a lot of people in my life. There are good and bad Catholics, just like there are good and bad Protestants and good and bad atheists.
Okay, let's just ignore this whole Catholic thing, you know. I want to talk about nationalism. Come on.
I just think it's the whole thing is a red herring and takes us down a ridiculous angle that does us no good whatsoever. Like we've got, maybe he was. We have so many enemies, internal and external, that we really don't need to fight amongst ourselves over, you know, what church you go to on Sunday. That seems ridiculous to me, given the number of internal and external enemies that we have. Like if you're a good and patriotic person, I really don't care what church you go to. It makes no difference to me whatsoever. Or if you go to a church at all, actually, from my point of view.
Do you mind if I respond to a comment?
Of course you can.
It's from a PEP. Most British I know don't realise Northern Ireland is half British. They aren't taught the history. That is correct. Ulster Scots are basically just Scots. That's like the majority of the population there. Ulster's the seat of civilization for both Ireland and Scotland. Therefore, it is inherently British, and therefore it has to be. If there was any region of Northern Ireland that was to be protected, it would be Ulster. Literally nothing else, because if the Irish get hold of it, they're going to turn it into an absolute pile of talk shit like they did in 1328 and in the 700s. It's
All right,
absolutely.
all right. I think. Yeah, all right. That's enough of that shit, man.
Sorry.
Really, I'm going to get bored with this, mate, quite quickly. It's like, sure, as far as I'm concerned, Ulster and Northern Ireland is British and it should remain British, but that doesn't make all non-Ulster Irishmen bad.
No, I'm. Okay.
Rip Napoleon.
Really, man.
I don't.
Give it a break. Now I can see why you and that other chap had an 80 message spurg on my Discord.
No,
And if either of you do it again, you'll both get kicked.
Okay. Okay.
Really, I've just had enough of it. I'm not having this shit.
We talk about how Britain almost.
I am really not trying to divide people even further than they're divided. I don't get this, mate. I really don't.
The general.
Okay, let's just talk about how Britain almost won the War of Independence. That will distract us from this topic.
Well, the British Army won more battles than it lost in America.
Oh yeah, they did, but
I don't think it almost won the War of Independence. I don't think we even came close because of the fucking decisions that we made.
Well, yeah, but you've got to remember, Napoleon, is that one of the reasons Britain didn't win is that half of the people in the UK, and particularly the important political people, i.e. the Whigs, didn't actually support Britain. They supported the Americans. And then on top of that, of course, Britain was not only fighting the Americans, Britain was fighting France, Britain was fighting Spain, and Britain was also fighting the Netherlands. So it wasn't like just Britain versus the American rebels. And as I said, half of the British generals and admirals wouldn't even serve there because they were Whigs and supported the Yanks. So
I mean, we've won wars before that without the majority population support. And wars that were longer than the War of Independence.
This I agree with from John McNamara in the chat. I totally agree with that. Yes, it was. The American War of Independence was actually more of a civil war than anything else. And some of the worst things that were done there were done by the American so-called patriots against loyalists. So yeah, it absolutely was kind of the English Civil War Part 2. Yeah, I think that's quite a good way to describe it in many respects. But you've got to remember, Britain fought that war hugely handicapped, not only because we were fighting against France, Spain, and Holland, but also because half of the British establishment wanted the Americans to win. So, there you go. I mean, people talk about the Monroe Doctrine, for example, this idea that Europeans weren't allowed to interfere in Central and South America. Yeah. And the only reason that the Monroe Doctrine worked at all through the whole of the 19th century was because of the Royal Navy. Because the American Navy certainly weren't strong enough to enforce it. The guarantors of the Monroe Doctrine were really the Royal Navy. So
that didn't stop all the Irish and Scottish mercenaries basically taking control of lots of newly liberated South American countries.
Well, there was a big Welsh population in Argentina, but most of them refused to fight in the Falklands War. Particularly when they heard the Welsh Guards were being sent there. So, Even some of the, I know I've read some accounts of a couple of Welsh descent conscripts in the Argentine army who basically refused to fire at the British troops because, apart from anything else, they might have been firing at another Welshman, you know. So, yeah, there was that. And of course, Britain had British Guiana in South America. That was a British colony. I mean, there's still a big French colony in South America, even to this day. And Britain also had a small colony in Central America, which is called Belize these days, which I think used to be British Honduras. And then, of course, down in the south, the Falkland Islands. So, like Britain's, and obviously, on the top of everything, there was Canada, which was British. And lots of the American loyalists ended up, Belize, I just mentioned that, Mitch. When I was in the British Army, one of the older corporals in the army had actually served in Belize when the fucking South Americans wanted to invade the place, and we sent troops over there. But and you know, a lot of the American loyalists actually ended up moving to Canada after the war, not least because they were continually persecuted by the so-called American patriots. So there's that. But do you? I take it, like young fellas like you two, that probably don't learn anything about the American War of Independence at school, do you?
No.
Well, I did, anyways.
I had to learn. Well, we don't really read up on like any of that stuff where I live, at least.
I beg your pardon. Sorry, I didn't catch a lot.
I guess because I live in Scotland, I don't learn the same things you do.
I don't know. I mean, like, I had a Scottish girlfriend for quite a long time in the 1980s, and she could she ran a university library, and she from a state education in Scotland, she could read and speak Latin and a bit of ancient Greek from a state school education, which would never happen in an English school.
For about quite a few hundred years, we had the best schools in Europe. Now they're the shittiest.
They've been destroyed by the They've been destroyed by the SNP, who changed the education.
Just pissed me off.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the UK education system is quite shit. The standards have went down, especially with this COVID. The standards will fall down to its roots.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't deny that for a second, but I mean, the point I'm trying to make here, Limbu, is that Scotland used to have its own education system.
Oh yeah.
Long before the SNP, and the SNP have actually completely fucked it up. Like it used to be really good in Scotland, and now it's not. Excuse me, I've got to deal with my little furry mate.
Furry mate.
That was my dog Rudy. My dog Rudy, who always has a say on these streams. But Scotland had this great education system. Like I remember, I was with my girlfriend, the Scottish one I was talking about, Napoleon, and we went to Ibiza, which I didn't much like, to be honest. But one of the useful things was I was looking at a couple of statues from the Spanish-American War and stuff that they had in Ibiza. And because she could speak and read Latin, she was able to work out what the captions on the statues said. You know, the inscriptions, because obviously, you know, Spanish is a Romance language, so it's based on that stuff. Alan Bastard, the Hound of the Baskervilles again. If only you saw him. He's a cross-Jack Russell. He's a tiny little guy, but he thinks he's a Rottweiler, but he's not. Scotland used to have a fabulous education system when it was supposedly dominated by England, and the SNP have completely fucked it up and turned it into a left-wing fuck-up like the rest of the British state education system. King Baby Bob in the chat. I find it weird that we learn British history and then suddenly switch to the American Civil War. Yeah, what the fuck the American Civil War is important to the British for? I do not understand. Really, I don't. It's peripheral to British history, quite honestly.
Yes.
I mean, it's a big deal. If you're an American, I can understand it's a big deal. If you're not, then it isn't. I mean, it's quite interesting from a military history point of view, but that's the only reason I know anything about it is because I'm interested in the military history. I certainly don't get involved in like the various takes about what was good and bad about both sides, because I've got nothing against the South, and I think the South, you know, they were the underdogs actually, in terms of manpower and money and all this kind of shit. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So let me. What I hear from all the younger guys on the Discord is that, like, basically in the British state education system these days, what you basically learn about is World War II, and more World War II. Is that the case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't get that. I just don't get it.
I don't know whether I'm the special case to go to private school, but we do learn about the Wessex and Mercia, Alfred the Great, and the
Cool.
100 Years' War.
Good.
So
We
do
good.
more older stuff.
Yeah, that's good. But like you said, Limbo, you're at private school, so I think that's going to be better.
My year don't know who Mussolini is.
You're kidding me.
Lovely.
Even though they teach you about World War II a lot, they don't tell you who Italian's leader was.
Right, I'm not saying this is me. Right, okay, because this isn't me. Okay, I actually read and I still read, but no one in my year knew who Mussolini was. It was shocking.
Hang on, guys. I've got to just say good evening to Apostolic Majesty. Apostolic Majesty has one of the best history YouTube channels on YouTube. Go and subscribe to him. Absolutely brilliant channel.
If AM's listening right now, we should really do a collab. # cheeky plug.
Listen, I'd love to get. I would absolutely love to get AM on a stream, on a history stream. I really would. You guys know that I'm shortly going to be doing a stream on John Chalmley's book, Splendid Isolation, which is British foreign policy, 1874 to 1914, and I would love to get Apostolic Majesty on that stream.
One thing which
like his insights.
which I've never understood is, especially in university philosophy, and economics, politics, philosophy, and economics, they link everything together with liberalism, with its roots of fraternity, equality, and liberty.
Yeah.
They always link it to Adam Smith, John Locke, and all those types of economic free Enlightenment type philosophers, and that is obviously indoctrination, because what I've understood and what I've read is that they don't touch on the counter Enlightenment. They don't touch on many other positions of reactionary traditionalists. Rather, they just touched on, okay, this is good. This is modern Britain, which clearly it's disgusting.
Well, I remember. I'm looking at this comment here from Evolve Saxon. When I did my O level, like it would have been, when did I do my O levels? For God's sake, late 70s, early 80s. I can't remember. Late 70s actually. When I did my O levels, I remember from my history exam that I had a huge question on the Napoleonic Wars and who was most important in winning out of the British Treasury, the Royal Navy, and the Army. And the British Army, and then also there was another big question about the Crimean War and like stuff about what sort of advances were in that war that hadn't been there before. Things like the telegraph and rifled firearms and all this kind of shit, you know. And like they were quite sensible questions. You had to answer in a quite sensible way. But everything I hear now is that basically the exams are easier to pass, and like. They just don't teach you very much about pre-World War II history. I mean,
Oh, no, they don't, no.
you're both very young chaps compared to me. So am I right? Do they teach you about history? Because nobody tells me they do.
Well, yeah, exception again. I think, yeah, they taught us the Boer War, but they framed it in such a way that they said Cecil Rhodes is a racist.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So they teach us that in my school. However, it's absolutely framed in a way to say, oh, egalitarian history is the way forward.
So if Cecil Rhodes was a racist, what were the Boers?
They didn't touch on that, surprisingly.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, they never touched on that. No.
Yeah, that's a surprise. Listen, I lived in South Africa for 15 years, and I had a lot of Afrikaner mates, and and many of them are very good guys, right? But they're not especially pro-British because of their history. They got beaten by the British in 1899, 1902, and also were subject to their own kind of propaganda and stuff in school.
Who's this Holstow lad? He said Cecil Rhodes was a Nazi.
Oh, for God's sake, no, it's just nonsense. Cecil Rhodes, oh, bugger off, Hardstow. That's just
ignore
nonsense.
him. He just wants a reaction.
Yeah, he's just trolling. I'm just going to show this one. That would be great. AM, if you can do that, I would really enjoy that. And we're quite a relaxed bunch. And normally I have some older people on the stream, but they haven't turned up this week. So I've got two very young chaps with me this week. But I mean, on the other hand, that is a chance for me to find out what the younger generation is learning or not learning.
Intellectual young chaps, mind you that.
Oh, well, I like Limbo. I did a stream with you on the Gurkha Rifles the other day. So, you know damn well that I've got nothing against young people. I just think that you guys are getting a biased view of the world from your education.
Oh yeah, we're getting fed shit, to be honest.
And as you pointed out, Limbu, I mean, you're a private school. I mean, I sent my son to private school purely because I didn't want him to get totally indoctrinated. But apparently, even that doesn't work these days. If you're getting stuff about Cecil Rhodes was basically a racist, well, I don't know that there's any real evidence that Cecil Rhodes was a racist. I mean, certainly not if you put him in the context of the 1890s, which of course you've got to do. I mean, you can't talk about people from the past in terms of current moral framing. You just can't do that. Like, if you did that, then, for example, the Romans are all completely evil and vile.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, they won,
For the Cecil Rhodes thing, they kept on repeating his quote, the Anglo-Saxon race is the best. I mean, like this thing, race
I've got no argument with that, to be honest. The Anglo-Saxon race.
I mean, I have nothing wrong with that. I personally think that's justifiable.
Would you consider Britain to be an Anglo-Saxon nation?
I've answered this many times, Napoleon. You're relatively new to these streams, but I've said this many times. Britain is an Anglo-Saxon Celtic nation. It's an Anglo-Saxon Celtic nation. Because you've got Celts in Scotland, you've got Celts in Wales, you've got some Celts in Northern Ireland, you've even got Celts in parts of Cornwall. So it's an Anglo-Saxon Celtic nation, if you want to be absolutely accurate.
Anglo-Saxon race is the best. I don't agree with that.
Well, I think the Anglo-Saxon Celtic race is the best, but I mean, being an Anglo-Saxon, obviously, I like the Anglo-Saxons. I mean, my Christian name is a traditional Anglo-Saxon name, so and I have the same name, the same Christian name, same middle name as my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, probably beyond that, and also the same one that my son's got. because the eldest son of the eldest son in my family always gets exactly the same name.
Yeah.
So I'm all about tradition. I'm absolutely a reactionary traditionalist. That's the best description of what I am. I was just going to say here, Hayden Redway and Cardamon in the chat. I love Rudyard Kipling. I think like some of his stories and stuff are great. I love a lot of his Soldiers 3 stories and all this kind of stuff. And Kim, the novel that Hayden Redway in the chat has just mentioned, even Indians like Kim because they think it's a very accurate representation of what India was like. And they're talking about the Indian side of what was going on in the old British India. So absolutely, and If is a great poem, although If was actually written for Dr. Jameson, and I'm not a huge Dr. Jameson fan, in all honesty, but it's a great poem, yes. Jameson, by the way, was Rhodes's sidekick. I have huge thoughts. His name is Paul Wolf Harris. Yeah, close, but no cigar.
Fair enough.
Close, but no cigar. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to ask Napoleon now. Come up with something positive this time, mate.
I don't really know. I mostly get asked the questions. I don't really hand out subjects.
All right, so you haven't got anything positive to say at all. That's a sad reflection on the young generation, isn't it?
I'll say this. I will say this. I mean, everyone here will agree with me anyway, but the British race, which includes, the Anglo-Saxons and Celts and particular Irishmen and Ulstermen, They are the greatest in the world. There's no competition to them. They are the greatest achievers that have ever existed.
Yep, definitely.
And there is no competition. There is absolutely no argument with that.
Yeah, I got no argument with that. I've got no argument
However,
with that. And in deference to Limbu, I have to say the Gurkhas are pretty good too.
I mean,
yeah,
I listen. The Anglos, they did what was needed. They did their job. They took over the 50% of the world. They did their job at the end of the day. Why are we complaining? There shouldn't be any, oh, I'm sorry for taking over your land. We did our jobs correctly. No need for that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't apologise at all for anything that Britain did in the 19th century. Nothing. I'm proud of most of it, to be honest.
I don't mean to sound like really homo and be like, oh, you're whitewashing everything. I don't agree with that characterization of Anglo as British, right? I don't mean to be like a homo and like a faggot and say that, like, I don't agree with that.
Explain how you disagree.
It's because, like we're talking about like the British, and you're saying like the Anglo went around the world and took all the land. There is absolutely no cultural, ethnic, or religious or genetic basis for calling Britain Anglo at any stage of history.
Oh, okay.
So I've always found it.
You're upholding the Scottish and Welsh and all that stuff. Yeah, quite right. So you should. You should.
Yeah, everyone here knows who Carlisle is. He was a great progenitor of the Anglo-Saxon word. He meant it more as like a cultural term, not in any other way. So that's why people, when they say Britain as being like the Anglo nation, they kind of get it mixed up with it to mean that it's just the English, and I think that's a misconception that a lot of people still have nowadays, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I listen. I have my arguments with little Englanders who we will find in the chat from time to time and this kind of stuff. I'm not a little Englander at all. You know, there are those people who claim to be nationalists who would like Scotland to get independence and buzz off, and Wales to get independence and buzz off. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how successful they think England could be on its own, given that Britain is not the world's largest country, even as it is. I mean, it's not a particularly small country in terms of population, but that's because we're overcrowded. But I certainly am one of those people that thinks that England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland are much stronger together than they would be separately, and I think that applies to all four of the nations.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that applies as well for the Old Commonwealth. I believe there was this poster of 5 British bulldogs on each corner, and they represented the nation of the Old Commonwealth. And right in the middle was
when the Old Commonwealth really meant something. Yes, I agree totally. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, look at World War One and World War Two, and also to some degree the Anglo-Boer War. I mean, without the help of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, Britain would have found all of those things much more difficult.
Yeah.
Although I've noticed that the horse-faced feminist bitch in New Zealand is currently going fairly anti-British, but then she is pro-Chinese. But she is pro-Chinese, so I mean, you know.
Yes.
I've got to address a couple of military nonsenses in the chat. First of all, Pep says this. Well, if you want to say the Prussian army was the best because it was the biggest, yeah, okay. But when the Prussian army or the German army fought the British in 1914, man for man, the regular British soldiers were actually much better trained. And somebody in the chat also said something stupid. Where was it? The British could fire, I don't know, he said something like 8 rounds in 5 minutes or some nonsense. Actually, all British infantry soldiers in 1914, because of the lessons the army had learnt in the Anglo-Boer War, they could all fire at least 15 aim rounds at a minute with their short magazine Enfields. And some of the more expert guys could fire 30. And the Germans, when they first fought the British Army at Mons in 1914 in Belgium, actually thought the British Army had loads and loads of machine guns, whereas in fact, British infantry battalions only had 2 per battalion. They had two Vickers Maxims per battalion. And it was just the infantry fired so damn quick. And they were taught to aim, not just fire quickly. They were aimed shots. And there are records of German officers saying our first action against the English, who we despised, has turned into an unprecedented defeat because so many German soldiers were shot down. But at the end of the day, the British Army was very small. It was a thing apart. It really was. It was they were the best soldiers ever to walk the earth, in my opinion. But there was only 6 divisions of infantry and 1 large cavalry division. And it was ridiculously small number of soldiers to put up against these huge continental armies, which were full of conscripts. And all right, we'll come on to this, but I mean, I'll just take your comments on that from you, Napoleon, and you, Limbo, and then I'll maybe move on to this. And this does go back to what I was talking about on the Jonathan Pole stream earlier. So carry on, guys. If you have any comments on that.
Yeah. In regard, see, like when I'm assuming he's talking about Frederick the Great and his army. This isn't really related to whether or not the Prussian army was the best, but it's still interesting. Frederick the Great's greatest opponent was born to a British family in Austria. It was Freiherr von Lauden, and Frederick the Great's, maybe not his greatest general, but his closest friend was a field marshal in the Prussian army. His name was James Keith, if you want to look him up. The British involvement in continental affairs has been well, no, that's another subject for another time. But I will say that there was water on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah. Limbo, you got anything on that one?
Oh no, not really. No, but I think I might want to head off now because I've got mass tomorrow. But to
No
quickly
worries.
touch on Adam's comment about Rhodesia. Yeah, it was a shame, to be honest. I mean, Kissinger had his proposal, but nothing came about with that. It was a shame, really.
Look, Rhodesia was a damn good country, and it's been ruined now. And the same thing has happened in South Africa. So I think those things just speak for themselves. You know,
Yeah.
you don't have to be a genius to see the state of Zimbabwe and South Africa now compared to the old days.
Aye, that comment by Two Drig, you fuck off now. Iron Duke's dreams are class.
All right, fair enough. So you gonna go? Are you, Limbo?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna go now. So in a
All
bit.
right, man.
Thank you for having me on.
Don't forget to check out Limbo's channel. It's called right on Limbo, is it?
Yeah, it's called RT Hon Limbo. So
Yeah, there you go. So check out Limbo's channel. It's worth having a look at. And thanks for coming on, mate.
no, thank you for having me on. Good night, lads.
No worries. Have a good day. All right. So I'm going to get on to this because I was talking about this to Jonathan Paul earlier. Like, as far as I'm concerned, the original sin of Britain and the British Empire was joining World War I in 1914, and even more so in raising a mass land army against all British tradition. Britain had never raised a conscript army, and doing so caused enormous casualties because, you know, if you fight the main body of the main enemy, i.e. the German army, for 4 years, you're going to get enormous casualties because that's just what happens in a war. And I think it destroyed many of the best talents in Britain. You know, the guys who would have gone on to be leaders of society, guys who would have been culturally important, as well as many of the best and bravest young men. They got killed. A much more sensible thing for Britain to have done would have been to have declared an armed neutrality in the North Sea, i.e. if the German icy fleet comes into the North Sea, we'll sink you. But other than that, we don't care. And to have let the French and Germans get on with it. And frankly, I think Germany would have beaten France in 1915. And I don't think it probably would have been much worse than what the Germans did to the French in 1870. I mean, you hear all this revisionist nonsense these days that, you know, somehow Kaiser Wilhelm was an absolutely evil man and et cetera, and I don't really think he was. I don't think he was the brightest tool in the shed, but I don't think he was particularly evil. And I honestly think the German victory over France in 1915 wouldn't have had a great effect on the British. French might have lost a couple of colonies, maybe. I'm sure it would have cost them a lot of money, but I don't think it would have been the end of the world. And I think the British Empire that stayed out of that war would have been immensely more powerful in 1919 than was the British Empire that took part in it and was a huge debtor to America at the end of the war. Like, there was nothing good about it from Britain's point of view, and people like Winston Churchill who supported it, and particularly Grey, the Liberal politician, the Foreign Secretary, who tied Britain into these ententes with France and Russia, were absolutely evil as far as I was concerned. I think it was just the worst thing to do. Like, because France and Russia weren't British friends, never have been. They're still not, you know. I don't think Britain needs to be particular enemies with Russia these days, but I still don't much like the French, you know, particularly under Macron. But Cardamom, why are you critical of British involvement in World War I? Because I'm not suggesting that Britain raises a mass land army and fights China on land for 4 years. I've never suggested that. Like, even if Britain had joined World War One in 1914, if they'd have done what they traditionally did, which is basically mainly use the Royal Navy, and then use the British Army as a projectile fired by the Royal Navy into a place where the Germans couldn't do much about it, then we might have won or done okay. I would have thought that actually would have been a better option than like Kitchener raising this mass army and then introducing conscription for the first time ever in British history for the army. That would have been a better option. Or maybe a better option would have been to do something like the Americans did and like not commit ourselves until maybe 1916, you know, when the other countries were much weaker and suffered many more casualties, and we could have made money off them for 2 years. I think that would have been a pretty good deal. I would have gone for that. And then maybe come in 1916 as the rescuing angels like the Americans did. So that even half their army that even got sent to France never saw any action. And yet they played an enormous and bad role in the peace treaty after World War One. So, you know, Woodrow Wilson, one of the worst American presidents ever. And even many Americans agree with that these days. But, yeah, so Cardamon, I'm not suggesting that Britain should go and, like, you know, send the enormously tiny British Army. The British Army in 1914, by the way, is enormous compared to the British Army in 2021. You know, everyone says that what a tiny army Britain had in the First World War. Great, brilliant, best trained soldiers in the world, but tiny. But it's almost 3 times the size. It was almost 3 times the size of the British Army today. That's how tiny the British Army today is. If the British Army was fighting a near-peer enemy, like, say, Russia, for example, even if the British Army was winning, it would be destroyed in about 3 weeks because it's so tiny, even if it was winning. The British Army today is in an absolutely terrible and disgusting position. And not a single infantry battalion in the British Army is at full strength at the moment, and we only have 32 infantry battalions left, which is a tiny number. But not only one of those battalions is at full strength. And do you know what battalion it is? It's the 1st Battalion of the Royal Gurkha Rifles. Every other battalion in the British Army is under strength, and some of them are very under strength. Like they've got about half the men they should have. The British Army at the moment is in an absolutely ridiculously piss-weak position. The only British armed force which is anywhere near what it should be at the moment is the Royal Navy, and even that's very under strength. Has far too few frigates and destroyers. Like, it's got 17 frigates and destroyers at the moment, when it should have at least a minimum of 25. And you know, the British carrier strike group that's going to sail through the South China Sea, and my son's on HMS Queen Elizabeth, so I have a vested interest in this stuff. And I will just say this: I have only 2 criticisms of the British carrier strike group. One is that it should have 4 frigates, not 2, although they have got allied ships helping them out. And the other thing is, instead of having 18 aircraft on board, it should have more like 36. They're my only 2 criticisms of it. And if the Chinese do want to, take a pot shot on them, do you know what? I think the Chinese will actually come unstuck.
Here we go. Buying on allies.
Yeah, Tommy Hill, I totally agree. I don't think we should be relying on allies. Like, the task group should be the carrier. It should be 4 anti-submarine frigates and 2 anti-aircraft destroyers, and plus the SSN and the killer submarine, and the support ships, obviously, from the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. That's what the task group should be, and the allies should just be on top of that. That I totally agree with. I doubt a blockade would harm the China. No, I'm not talking about a blockade. If there's going to be a war with China, which it will start because the Chinese are insisting on wanting to invade Taiwan, What will happen is it will be the American Navy, the Royal Navy, Japan, and the Royal Australian Navy, and possibly South Korea against the Chinese. And it will be principally a naval and air war if the Western allies have got any sense whatever. You might use a few commandos and Marines to take a few Chinese island bases, but you're not going to fight China on land. That's not the option at all. The idea is to sink half their navy and destroy as much of their air force as you can. And at the moment, I think we'd win. 10 years' time? Maybe not. The RN actually has Alan Bastard. The RN is actually reopening their base in Singapore. We already have a base on Brunei. There's a Royal Gurkha Rifle Regiment base there all the time. But the RN Singapore base is reopening, and there's going to be a warship based there all the time, a British warship. And Britain has been sending 1 or 2 warships into the Pacific for at least the last 6 years, every year. Why should Britain go to war with China over Taiwan? Because it's not just that Britain has interests in that area. I mean, you've also got to remember Australia is kind of a British ally with a lot of British people in it, or British descent people, I should say. So there's that. And China ain't our friend. I think anyone on the right, I detest Globo Homo. Don't get me wrong. I fucking detest Globo Homo. And that includes morons like the pedophile geriatric who's in charge of America at the moment, and also Alexander Johnson, who's another Globo Homo scumbag. But China ain't our friend. And a world run by the Chinese Communist Party would certainly not be any better than the one we're in now. And anyone who thinks it is pretty crazy, in my opinion. You haven't said anything for ages there, Napoleon. You got anything to add to any of that?
Oh, so, not really. I think you said all my thoughts.
British people are being shown and pissed on by their own government. Let's fight a superpower. To some degree, yeah. Why not? I'm not sure if I regard the Chinese as a superpower anyway, to be honest with you. But I certainly don't like them. I really don't like them. No, well, only because they're not there, man. Trust me. I've got to tell you, right? If you ever mix with loads of Chinese people, they don't like you. And if you think they do, you're making a serious mistake, Mr. Tommy Hill.
It's nothing personal.
This stuff that somehow the Chinese are based, not true, mate. Half the stuff which is going on in the Globo Homo world at the moment, where you're getting increasingly towards governments being able to track everything you do online and all the rest of it, that is being copied from the Chinese. Nobody likes the English people, really. Well, fuck them. That's what I say. But like, I've spent half my life in South Africa and Australia, and like, you know, I've never really got a load of shit. But then I'm 6'2", 200 pounds, and pretty ugly. So, you know, I never got much shit. Cardamom, China as a hyperpower wouldn't promote woke bollocks like America does. No, it would do it in a different way. It would do it in a different way. I mean, you know, sometimes I hear people saying, "Oh, Stalin was based," you know, but no, he wasn't. In my opinion, there's nothing much to choose between Stalin and Hitler. And in the same way, I think there's nothing much to choose between Globo Homo and the Chinese Communist Party. I think they're both shits. SA in Australia in the Anglosphere, yeah. Although in South Africa, the majority of white people, certainly these days, are actually Afrikaners rather than English speakers. But yeah, I'm the last of the Empire loyalists, Pep. That's what I've done with my life, I suppose, to some degree. Chinese demographics are buggered in the long term, yeah, but there's a billion of them, so it's a very, very, very long term that you're talking about. It's a long term. But yeah, I don't know. Like I'm not a fan of China at all. She's infiltrating everywhere she can, not just in the South China Sea. She's taken over huge amounts of Africa, certainly financially. But she's doing the same thing everywhere in Asia where she can, and she's no friend of Britain, mate. Well, even if Britain were to lose the American alliance, which I think is actually impossible, but even if we were able to do that, China would still not be our friend. I think Britain, like Russia's not Britain's friend, but I think Britain and Russia can be pretty neutral to each other. China, different story. Yeah, well, Tommy Hill, I've heard all this shit before, and I still don't believe it's right. I just don't agree with that view. That we're some sort of cucked tributary state. Yeah, if you're Tony Blair, and so I beg your pardon. What did you say?
Oh no, I was just saying, Tommy, let's go.
Yeah, I just think Tommy Hill's wrong about that. I don't agree with it.
Russia is less of a danger to us than America. It depends in what kind of context we're talking about. Like in terms of militarily. How do you say that? Militarily. Oh, fuck's sake. I don't know. I don't know if you can say that Russia is less of a danger than America. Maybe in terms of like social media and subversion.
Yeah. In terms, I see what he's saying in that sense. I don't disagree with that in that sense. But the fact is that Russia is basically a land power, and her navy at the moment, which is the main thing that could be a danger to Britain, is in an absolutely shit state. I mean, yes, it's a bit better than it was 5 years ago, but that's not saying much. The Russian navy is the main thing that could be a danger to Britain, and at the moment it ain't really. So it's not something I worry about. Question for me: if I fly a white English, you'll get nicked if you fly the white ensign, because you're not allowed to fly the white ensign unless you're a Royal Navy ship or a member of the Royal Yacht Squadron. The only people who can fly the white ensign are Royal Navy vessels and the Royal Yacht Squadron. And if you're not a member of either of those organizations, then you would get nicked for that. But I don't think anyone would care about the Jolly Roger, to be honest. If Hitler offered a guarantee, no, because it was ridiculous and Hitler could never have offered such a guarantee anyway. How could Hitler have offered that guarantee, even if he was willing to do so? And no, and no.
Maybe he would have done it with a UFOs, brand new UFO technology.
Yeah, all those UFOs that the Germans supposedly had at the end of World War II, which they didn't have.
Okay.
Our biggest danger is our own leaders. Well, yeah, to some degree, I think that's true. But, what have we got? And when you're forced to abandon colonial possession or threat. Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about Suez there, Adam. Suez should have been a huge wake-up call for the British. But on the other hand, what I have to say about Suez is Sir Anthony Eden, who was the Prime Minister at the time, Sir Anthony Eden in the 1930s, when he was Foreign Secretary, single-handedly managed to turn Mussolini, who didn't like Hitler at the time, into an enemy of Britain. Because he didn't like Mussolini invading Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia these days, where the Italians had been involved for 50 years. Like, they suffered an enormous defeat at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, when something like, I don't know how many of them were actually Italian, but an Italian army, which included a load of colonial soldiers, got almost wiped out. like it made the British defeat at Isanawala look small scale. And so, to some degree, Mussolini was like avenging that stuff. And Italy had been involved in Ethiopia for ages, and it was no skin, as far as I'm concerned, it was no skin off Britain's nose whether Italy ran Ethiopia or not. They'd probably run it better than the Ethiopians, so who cares? That's Abyssinia, patriotic archive, yeah. And Anthony Eden deliberately made Mussolini an enemy of Britain. And Mussolini was not mates with Hitler at that stage. I mean, Hitler was sending arms to the Abyssinians. And Mussolini, when Hitler walked into Austria with the Anschluss, Mussolini sent troops into the Alps. Like, had it not been for Anthony Eden, it's perfectly possible that Italy might have been on the Allied side in World War II rather than Germany's, which would have saved Britain an enormous amount of bullshit in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And allowed us perhaps to reinforce the Far East before the Japanese attacked the damn place. But I mean, and so like Anthony Eden again was Prime Minister at Suez. And one of the things that happened at Suez is that Eden fucked around for so long doing it. Like, he should have just done it rather than messed around. And then as soon as like the Americans threatened him, he completely backed down. Whereas I would have said to the Americans, okay, if you want to ruin your most important ally in Europe, go do it. Bet they wouldn't have. You know, the Americans tried this. They tried this to some degree in the Falklands War. They wanted to be even-handed because they were allies with Argentina as well. And Mrs. Thatcher just turned around and said, nah, you got to choose. Like, either Britain's your ally or Argentina is. And that's what Eden should have done to America in 1956, but he wouldn't do it.
What was that quote from that guy? It was our biggest danger is our own leaders. Was that it?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I think there was a quote. It was something like our biggest danger is our own leaders.
Oh, yeah. I don't disagree.
I don't agree with that. I think it's another demographic. However, I can't say who, otherwise Duke will get annoyed.
Yeah, I will. Absolutely. And I do think it's our own leaders. I mean, like, who's got the most influence on what happens in the UK these days? I'd say it's Alexander Johnson and the cabinet. Alexander Johnson and the cabinet.
No, I'm joking.
Really, mate. Honestly, and also, like, honestly, if you hold some of these views, you're in the wrong Discord, man.
Right. Just to be clear here, I wasn't inferring the Jews, right? I wasn't saying they was the Jews.
Look, listen, I'm not in favor of Zionism at all. I'm no great friend of Israel. I'm quite neutral on Israel. I don't think they're our friends. I don't really care about Israel. But the idea that everything is this enormous Jewish conspiracy, I find like ridiculous. And you know, the idea that they're quite a small number of people in the world, but they're super Jews, you know?
Yeah.
And then we're powerless against these enormously powerful super Jews. I just think it's crap, mate. Honestly, I just think it's crap.
Yeah, the Jewish theory is merely a distraction.
Well, it is, and it's also it's a hangover from getting involved with mid-20th century German politics.
Yeah, well,
and like this whole channel, and everybody involved in it, really, like the older people like Harman and Sojo, etc. The reason we started this stuff was because we knew damn well that that's not British nationalism, and it's never going to fucking win either. That was the whole reason we decided to start this channel, is because, you know, if you go down the Mark Collett route, you're never going to get anywhere. And I think it's perfectly possible that Mark Collett is in some way or shape or form actually some sort of British government fed, because I reckon that's how he carries on, to be honest with you.
That's his financial support.
Wouldn't surprise me in the smallest degree if that was the case, I tell you now. Really wouldn't. And you just waste so many people's time and energy on a political party, PA, which can't even get itself registered as a political party.
Yeah.
It's just bullshit. I mean, how stupid do you have to be to see that it's one way or another, it's a distraction and a bullshit distraction? So again, I don't go along with that stuff. I don't support that stuff, and I think it's bullshit. And also, you know, mid 20th century Germans, what the fuck have they got to do with British nationalism? Jack shit. I mean, if even the Germans don't support them these days, why the fuck should British people? And we didn't even support them at the time. Like, the black shirts were a tiny minority movement in Britain. You know, Oswald Mosley's lot. They were a tiny minority movement in Britain, and that's all they ever were.
I'll be back in a minute.
Okay. John Smith, PA are pro-Irish unification. Yeah, I believe they are. I believe they are. I just think they're a joke party, and I would not be at all surprised if in some way, shape or form they were linked to the British government. Wouldn't surprise me in the least degree. And they're there deliberately to take away real British patriot and nationalist energy and misdirect it into a cul-de-sac where it's never going anywhere. Adam, yeah, I also think this is true. This is absolutely true. British nationalism polluted by Americans. Yes, it is. Because the whole white nationalism thing comes from America, because you can't talk about American nationalism because Americans all come from somewhere else, you know, ultimately. And okay, there are a relatively small number these days of people who can trace themselves back into the 1600s or even just prior to the American War of Independence. Those are a relatively small number of white Americans. So this is why you get this white nationalism stuff in America. Whereas in Europe, that makes no sense. I mean, I think you can perfectly well be a British nationalist, you can be a French nationalist, you can be a German nationalist, as far as I'm concerned. But I don't think white nationalism doesn't make any sense in Europe. You know, does that mean I'm supposed to be like absolutely, totally agreement with people in France or Germany or Norway or fucking Austria or wherever you might want to talk? I just don't think it's true. And America is where most of the Nazi LARPing comes from. Yes, I do agree with that. But I think like British nationalist parties have been doing this stuff certainly since the 1960s. And the same sort of people, often the very same people, are involved in all this shit constantly. I mean, you know, Mark Collette goes back a long time. And to me, the only reason that this is allowed to go on is because the British government wants it to go on and it suits them, because it takes people into a cul-de-sac which will never get anywhere. And that was one of the original reasons I started my channel, is because like I'm absolutely against this Nazi LARPing bollocks. That is the 100% main thing I'm against. Evolved Saxon, you know what? Britain first, yes, absolutely. I totally agree with that. But you know what? France and Germany have to sort their own shit out. It ain't our problem. Sorry, it's not our problem. We have enough problems to deal with without trying to help the French and the Germans. I'm not saying that nationalists and patriots in France and Germany and UK can't cooperate. That's fine. Yeah, they can do that. And we shouldn't be against each other. But the idea that somehow it's Britain's problem, that Angela Merkel invited 500,000 Syrians into our country, or Sweden invites God knows how many Somalis, that's nonsense. That's not British nationalism's problem. The basic problem of British nationalism is to stop mass immigration from wherever it comes. If we could do that, that would give us a chance of sorting out other stuff. And it should be the main thing that we go on about all the time is end mass immigration. And I won't even say end mass third world immigration, just end all mass immigration. You should only be able to get into Britain, A, for a limited period of time, and B, for a specific job that we don't have people to do. Apart from that, you shouldn't be able to come here. That's my whole point. I think all British nationalists should constantly be banging on about that as their major talking point. What we want, above everything else, much more important than anything else, is to end mass immigration. You know, the idea of like 50, 60, 70, 150, 250,000 people a year coming into the UK. That has to be stopped. If we don't stop that, the nation is doomed. And not in the long run, in the short to medium term, it's doomed. And that's my honest opinion on that stuff. I as I said, it was one of the original reasons that this channel exists. And it's also to point out that these guys who go, when you ask them what's their favorite book and they say Mein Kampf, i.e. Mark Collette, I mean, give me a break. I mean, even if he really believed that, why the fuck would he say it? I mean, how thick is he? I just, it's beyond me that someone could be that dense. So I reckon he did it on purpose. And I don't think Mark Collette's the brightest tool in the shed, apart from being a manlet. You know, he's about 5'5" or something. But apart from that, how dim do you have to be? Welcome back, Napoleon.
Shalom.
Yeah, right. Did you hear? Did you hear what I was saying, or what?
I caught Mark Collette is a manlet and is 5'5".
Yeah, he is. There was actually a guy who did a stream on this like a long time ago. It's probably about 15 months ago now, and was comparing his height in various photos with people whose height we knew. And it turns out he is about 5'5". So there you go. But
Mark Collette exposed.
And he's also been exposed at least twice by Jewish journalists who he befriended and came out with loads of crap. He befriended them, and he was sitting in his car and telling them how wonderful Hitler was and all the rest of it. There's hardly a family in Britain that hasn't lost at least one relative fighting the Germans in the First World War, the Second World War. And to me, it's really not the best way to win British support, you know? It's just not. Patriotic Archive, Mark Collette cares more about Dresden than Coventry. Absolutely 100% true. That's absolutely 100% true. And it just shows what a sham his idea of British nationalism is. It's not British nationalism. It just isn't.
Your favourite books are by David Duke and Lincoln Rockwell. Well, you know. Yeah, no,
this was Collette. He's talking about Collette.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, Collette was asked for his three favourite books. The first one he came out with was Mein Kampf. Then he came out with George Lincoln Rockwell, who was an American neo-Nazi guy. And also supposedly Dr. David Duke, who was a Ku Klux Klan guy.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing to me that unless you are the world's biggest moron, which maybe he is, I mean possibly, but I doubt it. If you come out with shit like that, you're doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
You know?
I have to say I've read some of Rockwell's work, especially the one on he got thrown into an asylum, and it was a really good book on how to avoid being how to get out of a mental hospital safely, because a lot of fucked up things happen in there. and you have to kind of survive.
Yeah, and I can believe that. That's kind of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest type stuff, yeah.
But the one written by David Duke is one on Jewish power, which is
There's been a lot of those, I know. There's been a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know. Look, my dad was born in 1933, and his home in London was bombed flat by the Germans in 1940. Luckily, his family were all in the air raid shelter, so no one got killed. But his home was nonetheless bombed flat. And my father also remembers, like, quite late in the war, a Woolworths store got hit in the Old Kent Road by a German V2 rocket. And there was no defense against these V2s. The Americans actually took the bloke who designed them over to America, and he worked on the Apollo project after World War II. No lie. But this V2 hit a Woolworths and killed about 50 kids because they were all in the sweet section. You know, the Woolworths in the UK used to sell sweets and bullshit like that. And my dad remembered this stuff. And when I was a kid, you could still walk under a railway bridge in Bermondsey. Actually, I think it was in Camberwell. That still had cannon holes in the iron bridge from a German Messerschmitt 109 fire that machine gunned the fucking thing for no great reason. So, you know, the idea that we're all going to turn around and support neo-Nazis like idiot Claire is just ridiculous. Yeah, Cardamom, Werner von Braun is the bloke I was talking about, who helped design the V2 rocket, and then with the help of loads of slave laborers, by the way, and then the Americans took him to America, and he ended up being a great hero of the Apollo project. So yeah,
Germans.
and I did see earlier on someone said loads more people were killed in Dresden than Coventry. Yeah, that's true, but you know what? That was because the British had bigger and better bombers, and we could better control them. It wasn't because the Germans wouldn't have killed more people if they could. And it was the Germans in World War One, first of all with Zeppelins, you know, the airships, and then with Gotha bombers and stuff, who started bombing cities. That was a German deal, not a British deal. And in the early stages of World War II, the RAF were only allowed to do things like bomb forests rather than cities, and they couldn't bomb jack shit because they couldn't find them. The navigation wasn't good enough.
They could find the forest.
And yeah, only 300 people were killed. Oh my God, yeah, right. Great if you're not one of those people's children or parents or brothers or sisters or whatever you might be. And like, you know, you don't have to be a great genius to see Britain didn't want to fight World War II. This is why you had the whole Munich nonsense and all this kind of stuff. Britain was desperate not to fight World War II. Adolf Hitler absolutely pushed Britain into doing so.
He went and apologized to Germany. Yeah,
Who did?
I don't. This guy called John Edmund. He was a veteran, but I don't believe that Dresden was justified. But to go over and say sorry to them is an absolute. I'm sorry, but that is an absolute prick move.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I don't think we should have bombed Dresden, but I know why we did. It's because Stalin asked us to.
That's just sad.
I mean, you know, I don't think bombing Dresden was a good plan. Don't get me wrong. I actually think, leaving aside the moral arguments, I just think the amount of resources and men that Britain put into Bomber Command in World War II wasn't worth it. They should have used those aircraft and men to more quickly win the Battle of the Atlantic by sinking German submarines with these long-range 4-engine aircraft and stuff. That's what Britain should have done. And that would have actually helped Britain more. But you can't argue that the Bomber Command guys weren't the bravest of the brave. It was the most dangerous job you could do in the Commonwealth Armed Forces. And remember that the Bomber Command were mostly British, but there were also lots of Canadians, lots of Australians, some New Zealanders, some South Africans. And they lost 57,000 dead, which is a lot. It was the most dangerous job you could do in World War II. They were extremely brave. The German flak and searchlights were very dangerous, and their night fires, radar-controlled night fires, were absolutely deadly. And I won't. Do I agree with what happened? No, not really. But the blokes who actually were doing the job, they were doing what they were told, and they were extremely brave young men. And we didn't start it; Germany did.
Oh, yeah.
So again, I'm not going to argue about that shit. And Dresden, you know what? If Dresden was, how can you start World War II, right, which killed millions upon millions upon millions of people all over the fucking place, and then go, oh, fuck me, you won Dresden, you evil bastard Brits. Fuck off. Get fucked.
Something about Dresden being a major railway junction. Yeah. It
was, but also it was because Churchill wanted us to not Churchill, Stalin wanted us to bomb it because it would supposedly help his forces.
One of the reasons why we probably the only reason why we targeted the railways is because they were sending trains into concentration camps, and we didn't know whether they were Jews or like certain castes that were being supplied.
I very much doubt that Britain bombed anywhere because of that, because it wasn't really even widely known until the end of the war.
But they didn't know at the time, and when they did bomb the railways, they accidentally bombed a carriage, and it turns out that there was a bunch of Jews in them, but it was an accident, and they couldn't tell that they were Jews in them. So it was like it was one of the reasons why they initially bombed railways when they stopped them, because they accidentally bombed a carriage full of Jews.
I have no idea, mate. I think the whole Jewish influence on World War II is vastly exaggerated these days by people for their own reasons.
The Jews were being sent to the concentration camp.
Yeah, but we didn't. We basically did not know much about that until very close to the end of the war.
Yeah,
like World War II was not fought for Jews, not at all. The idea that World War II was fought to stop the Germans killing the Jews is bullshit on two levels. It's bullshit, A, because it wasn't, but B, the Germans only started killing them well into the war. Hitler had hardly killed anyone in 1939. And I ain't a friend of Hitler at all, but he had hardly killed anybody. He was a mere novice at mass murder compared with Stalin in 1939. Anglo-Nile, have I read The Art of War by Sun Tzus? Yes, I have, at least twice. But yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, Cardamom, Millennial Woes is another one, man. I used to quite like Millennial Woes until he tied himself in with Mark Collette and PA and all that bugs. That's when I stopped following him. It's like you can't tie yourself in with that shit, because A, it will never win, and B, most ordinary British people who have had relatives killed fighting Germany will never support it. And Britain has never been a supporter of National Socialism. Never. You'd have more chance in Ireland, because Ireland was a bit like that at one stage. You know, it's just, and like I said, I think the reason Mark Collette is allowed to carry on the way he is because the British government wants him to. The British Globo Homo government wants him to. That's my honest opinion.
Yeah.
Is there a difference from taking the knee? This is a good question from John McNamara, who is one of our regulars in chat. No, not much. No, not much, actually. I wouldn't take the knee for Dresden or George Floyd. Fuck both of them, to be honest with you. You know, Dresden
Take a
was...
knee on George Floyd.
Yeah, I'd take a
Sorry,
knee
go
on
on.
him. Yeah, no, me too. But you know, Germany, it was in the middle of a war. All countries do shit stuff during the middle of a big war. He cries over the German victims. He never says a word about the British ones. Not a word. Britain is complicit in the Holocaust. How, John Smith? How exactly?
Where the fuck did that come from?
Yeah, it's just
Sorry,
bollocks.
where is that? Britain is complicit in the Holocaust.
There you go. How?
I don't, honestly, I consider myself to know quite a bit about history. I have never heard that in my entire
I mean,
life.
Britain took Jewish refugees prior to World War II, and my grandfather, who was a regular soldier in between the wars, who fought on the Northwest Front of India, he joined up again in 1940, even though he had 7 kids, and he went across on D+3 and fought right the way to the end of the war in Europe when Hitler and the Germans surrendered. In what way was he complicit in the Holocaust? Get fucked. Sorry, I mean, absolutely get fucked if you think that. You're a moron. I don't know who's worse sometimes, the fucking liberals or the fucking Nazi larpers. I mean, they're both fucking wrong, but it's like it's to decide which one is more dishonest.
They're both quite fucked in the head.
Britain was complicit in the Holocaust. Get fucked. No, it was not. And Cardamom, you know what? British academics have said that the British Empire was racist and vile, and I don't believe that either.
Some arguments have said Britain to denying the Jews' right to immigrate was complicit in the Holocaust.
Yeah, and British
we keep it back.
Well, but British academics come up with more bollocks than most people, you know? So these are the people that are telling us that Cecil Rhodes was a terrible, evil, semi-neo-Nazi, you know? It's just crap. I really, these people get on my nerves. I do not understand how people can be so damn dumb. And I tell you what, for once I'm going to agree with Natman Prime here. Britain was complicit in the Holocaust of its own soldiers in World War One. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. I mean, not because our generals were particularly bad. They weren't. All generals suffered enormous casualties in World War One of all sides. The only thing I would say is we shouldn't have had a mass land army to have all those casualties in the first place, because that's not the British way of warfare. Colin Liddell, I don't know if I totally agree with this. I do like Colin Liddell, but I'm not sure I totally agree with that. But yeah, maybe it's possible anyway. I'm not sure if it did actually. I don't know if it did actually end the war much earlier anyway, to be honest. But that's certainly as valid a way to look at it as it was some terrible British war crime. You know, all big countries in big wars do bad things. It's just the way wars are. You can't fight a big war and not do bad things. I mean, like we often hear people slagging off RAF Bomber Command for firebombing German cities, and no one says anything about the Americans, because apparently the Americans were like these wonderful guys doing accurate daylight bombing. Although actually, you know, bombing through cloud is not all that accurate. And there's a lot of cloud in the skies of Europe most of the time. But if you look at Japan, the American Air Force against Japan firebombed the whole damn place. Like, people always go on about the two A bombs they dropped on Japan, but they actually caused vastly more casualties by firebombing all their other cities. Far worse than the RAF did to Germany, particularly as the Japanese had lots of like wooden and paper buildings.
Yeah.
Have I seen the new British jet coming in 2036, the Tempest? I've seen mock-ups of it, yes. What about it? Doesn't mean much to me, to be honest with you. The existence of PA alone justifies stress and demonstrates Britain didn't go far enough. Yeah, that's one way to talk about it, I suppose. Yeah, I think the Americans bombed the area around it, but the Americans always try and pretend they didn't do area bombing in World War II, which in fact is not true, because the wonderful American Norden bomb site didn't work through cloud, and there was a lot of cloud over Europe most of the time, as anyone who's ever been there can tell you. But and again, I think Adam's got the right thing here. The Germans bombed London suburbs. The only difference was that when the British were doing this bombing later in the war, we had bigger and more powerful aircraft that carried bigger bomb loads, and we had more of them. Like, had the Germans been in the position in 1940 and 1941 that the British were in 1944, the Germans would have done exactly the same to Britain. And the idea that they wouldn't is frankly crazy. I mean, just look at their V1 and V2 rocket attacks, which couldn't be aimed at all. You could only just say, okay, we want these to land somewhere in the middle of London. That's what they did. And if they'd have had thousands upon thousands of them, they would have done that too. So, you can't say that somehow or another Britain was morally worse than Germany, because we weren't. I mean, as I said, I don't actually agree with the area bombing campaign, mainly because I think it was a waste of British resources that would have been better used somewhere else. But I don't have a moral objection against it.
I have a solution to all of this overflow.
What's that?
Let us move on to another topic. I think that will be
Go on
refreshing.
then. You pick.
Oh fuck. Can you come back to me?
No, you just said move on to another topic. I assumed you had one lined up there.
No, well, let's have a conversation about a patriotic alternative. How about that?
Haven't we been talking about those fuckers for too long?
And then, okay, in my defense,
all right, look, this is my view of patriotic alternative, okay? I think a lot of the ordinary people who support it are good people, and they don't really realise what it is. I think Mark Collett is a disingenuous twat who is allowed to do what he does by the British government, at least. Like, he could easily be a Fed, I got no idea, but he's at least allowed to do what he does. And I think they just lead British nationalists and good British patriotic people down a cul-de-sac, and that really suits the British government, because they don't want an alternative to the so-called, in inverted commas, Conservative Party, which is not a right-wing party at all anymore under Alexander Johnson. I think he's a bad person, and like I said, I think a lot of people who support PA just don't realise what it is because they don't follow it closely enough.
Right, I have another subject.
Go on then.
It's actually my profile picture right now. I don't know if anyone saw that, but what is your opinion on Mount Batten?
Oh, crikey. Not good. Not good. I mean, his wife was having sex with Nehru when Mountbatten had agreed with the Labour Party's idea of giving away India and becoming the last viceroy. Like, he shouldn't have done that. I don't think he should have get stuff, find a socialist to do it. But his wife was like having sex with Nehru, and apparently his wife was always having affairs with different people. So I don't have a high opinion of him on that. I think he was a reasonably brave British destroyer officer in World War II. I think he made some mistakes when he was in charge of the Royal Navy in the 1950s. So that's about my only opinion. I'm not a fan, to be honest. And I mean, when he was Commander in Chief in the Far East, he did some good things. Like I think he eased cooperation between the Brits and the Yanks. But I'm not a fan. No, I'm not a fan of Mountbatten, really. I thought it was sad that the IRA murdered him. The Provisional IRA murdered him. I thought that was sad.
Yeah.
But
just let the man fish.
But apart from that, so yeah, Colin Liddell, by the way, is completely right about this. That the US suffered higher casualties in the last couple of months of the war than they did during the D-Day invasion. That's quite true. I'm not sure it would have been true of the British, mind you, who suffered a lot more casualties in the Normandy fighting than the Americans did, because the British were fighting most of the German armour and the Americans weren't. Like, more than 3/4 of the German armoured divisions were fighting the Brits and Canadians. They weren't fighting the Yanks. But yeah. So
Mark Collett on GB News for that would be spicy.
I don't see that happening somehow. But I mean, you know, GB News to me is like it's even more controlled opposition than Collett. Because I think Collett and GB News are both controlled opposition. I just do. Because GB News will never talk about real subjects. They'll only talk about stuff that's okay according to the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party in inverted commas, I should say. So, yeah. Mountbatten approved Wingate's. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Wingate's idea of the Chindits, it did some good for morale. I actually knew a Chindit when I was a young chap. I used to work at this cash and carry place in West Sussex. And the guy who ran the petrol station there was a former Chindit. And yeah, I mean, it did some good for British Army morale, and the Chindits proved that the Brits could go behind Japanese lines and beat them in the jungle. But by and large, it wasn't really worth it, no. Did Morgoth's review go on Delingpole? I don't know. I mean, my views on Delingpole is that Delingpole is doing some quite good stuff. But I don't agree with everybody he's interviewing, obviously. And also, I would say, like, I went off Morgoth for quite a long time, but I think recently, Morgoth has actually made quite a few good videos. So I will say that. I know I absolutely went off him totally for a while, but I think he's actually made some quite good videos recently. So maybe he's getting his mojo back to some point. I don't know.
Ord Wingate. Everyone talks about Ord Wingate. No one talks about Reginald Wingate, who was an absolute. He was an absolute G. He was an absolute boss. I think more people should learn about Reginald Wingate.
Who was Reginald Wingate, mate?
He was a general in the British Army, and he was very.
When?
It was during like a Kitchener's.
Oh, okay, yeah. 1890s. Oh, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Now I know what you're talking about. Not a problem. Yeah. Ord Wingate was an oddball, is what he was. He was very much an odd chap. And to be honest, I think he wasted a lot of resources that could have been better used for other things. But his initial Chindit operation did help British morale. Alan Bastard MP is saying Morgoth and Millennial Woes great video makers. I started off quite liking Morgoth. I went off him when he got quite heavily tied in PA. And the same thing with Woes. When he got tied in with PA, I just went off him. But then PA security enforcement is saying Morgoth His PA isn't he though? I don't know that he is. I haven't like the recent videos I've watched of Morgoth. He hasn't gone on about them, so I don't know. The Burma front during the war was a diplomatic disaster. I don't know that it was. I talked about this with Limbu on the Gurkha stream because the Gurkhas played a huge part in this. The biggest defeat that the Imperial Japanese Army ever had in its entire history was in Burma in 1944 and 1945 against the Anglo-Indian British Army. That was the biggest defeat they ever had on land because none of the American island campaigns involved so many Japanese troops. And the British at the end of the war absolutely, totally destroyed the Japanese army in Burma. And it was the biggest defeat the Imperial Japanese Army ever had. Sadly, it was done by the British 14th Army, who were quite rightly known as the Forgotten Army, because no one ever remembers them these days. Just like the British Pacific Fleet that was fighting the Japanese off Japan is the Forgotten Fleet because no one remembers that. This was a huge British fleet, the biggest British fleet of World War II. That in the end had like 4 battleships and 8 aircraft carriers and loads of cruisers and destroyers and stuff, and no one even remembers it anymore. And Kin Sin, yeah, absolutely. If you want to read some good British military history, and you can also find a few good videos on this on YouTube, etc. You got to read the battles of Imphal and Kohima. In particular, Kohima, you had one British infantry battalion of the Royal West Kent Regiment, which was fighting a whole Japanese division with only a very few Gurkha and Indian allies, tiny numbers of allies. And it was one battalion. And at one stage, they were fighting across the tennis court of the British High Commissioner's bungalow. And the Brits were on one side of the tennis court, and the Japanese were on the other. And the British actually outfought these guys. Kin Sin again, Safely Quartered Out Here by George MacDonald Fraser is an excellent book. Yeah, it's a really good book, well worth reading too. But yeah, if you want to read some tales of British heroism, by all means read about Imphal and Kohima. And as I said, the British Army in 1944 and 1945 absolutely destroyed the fucking Japanese. But you never hear about it. All everyone goes on about is Singapore and what have you. So there is that. Anything to add, Napoleon?
No, I actually have to sign off because
Cool,
it's midnight.
Cool,
I want to go. Yeah.
That's cool, mate. I'm about to finish anyway. All right, guys. I'm about to play us out, and I'm going to play us out with a tune. Do you have anything to share, Napoleon, before you go?
Nah, not really.
No worries. All right, I'm going to play us out with a tune, as I usually do. So let's do this. And this is a tune from the excellent Patriotic Archive channel.
Let's go.
Oop, here we go.
All right. Well, I felt like that was a very appropriate ending tune. Duke, are you with us?
Yeah, I was just saying that was the 5th Inniskilling Dragoons, a heavy cavalry regiment of the British Army, and they took part in the Charge of the Heavy Brigade, which no one ever remembers today because, unlike the Charge of the Light Brigade, it was totally successful. Outnumbered about 4-1, the British heavy cavalry regiments, that included the Scots Greys, charged into the Russians and carved them apart. And didn't get shot up by the Russian artillery and riflemen, unlike the Light Brigade. So no one remembers the Charge of the Heavy Brigade, but everyone knows the Charge of the Light Brigade. So anyway, guys, I think that's our show for this week. Please remember to like and subscribe because it helps the channel. And we will see you again next week. Go well.
Cheerio, everyone.